you come to my door, and I'm white, you're black, and you say, sir, I want to buy your house. And I say to you, look, I won't sell my house to anyone who's black. Now, isn't that a negative outcome of a market?
No, I don't believe so. I don't believe that is, I mean, I could walk up to some white girl walking along the street and I say, well, look, lady, I want to marry you and you ought to give me equal opportunity. She said, well, look, I don't marry blacks. Or a white lady could come up to me and say, and ask me to marry her. I can say, look, I don't marry white ladies. Now, so what you're really talking about is freedom of choice. That is, I believe that you have the right to sell your house to whomever you please. I have the right to sell my house to whomever you please. Now, I don't believe you have the right to use the coercive powers of government to force your neighbor through law or through intimidation to sell his house to who you think he should sell his house to. Now, just looking at housing discrimination, for example, I think it's a very interesting example of the market. In the United States, there's been discrimination against blacks, but a lot of times you saw restrictive covenant laws, or you saw other kinds of intimidation, other intimidation against blacks from buying houses in certain areas, violent intimidation. Now, ask yourself, if white people would not sell their houses to blacks, why would you need a law? I mean, the very existence of a law suggests that there are people around that would not act according to the way the law specifies. So there's a real question of whether you, Bob Chittister, would sell the house, would refuse to sell the house to me. Economic theory says that there exists a price whereby you will sell the house to me. Now, maybe I don't want to go as high, I don't want to make the price that high, but there exists a price. Basic economics tells us that. And furthermore, I might add that if you look at cities like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, in the 1920s, before we even had an Equal Housing Act, whole neighborhoods were going from white to black virtually overnight, and nobody could stop it. That is, Harlem became a predominantly black neighborhood before there was any EEOC, before there was HUD, before there was any of these anti-discrimination laws. That is, the market took care of much of this problem. The market made discrimination very costly.
What limits, if any, would you set on the exercise of these private property rights, if you would?
Well, I would probably set very, very few limits. That is, and we really have to talk about, I'll just briefly mention what property rights are. Property rights are the right to keep, acquire, and dispose of property that's left in the hands of the owner of the property. Now, part of my property right, let's say if I own a house, means that you cannot run your car through my house because I own the house. Even though you own the car, it means that you cannot infringe upon my property rights. So what I'm saying is that as long as individuals do not infringe upon the property rights of others, I would say they have the right to use their property any way they want to.
Well, why is private property so important?
Well, private property is very, very, very important because it forces all of us to take into account our private or our current decisions on the future values of things. For example, I think that it is a good idea that houses be available for future generations. Let's say the kid that's going to be born in 2050 or 2075. It's probably a good idea that houses be around for him to live in. Now, the fact that I privately own my property forces me to take into account the effect of my current decisions on the life of my house. Now, the way that it forces me to do that is that if I don't make the necessary repairs to maintain my house, well, my house is going to deteriorate, and the selling price that I can get for my house is going to be very, very low. But if I take care of my house to ensure that it will provide housing services for many, many years, well, then the selling price of my house is going to be very, very high. Now, so through private property rights and the right to transfer without interference, it holds our personal wealth, as my colleague Armin Alshan says quite frequently. It holds our personal wealth hostage to our doing the right thing. Now, ask yourself, well, would people have the same kind of incentives to maintain their property or maintain a piece of property if the government owned the property? Or would they have the same kind of incentives to maintain property if there were a 75% tax on the property when you went to sell it? No, they wouldn't. And so what I'm saying in a nutshell is that private property forces people to do socially responsible things. And matter of fact, some of our greatest problems are in areas where things aren't held privately. That is, we hear all kinds of statements. People are worried about the extinction of the elephant. They're worried about the extinction of the whale. They have clubs, Ducks Unlimited, worrying about certain kinds of ducks. Now, I haven't heard a single person form a group worrying about the extinction of pigs and sheep and chickens and cows. Now, why not? Well, in the case of eagles and buffaloes, it is in no individual's personal private interest to spend a lot of resources making sure that buffaloes and eagles are well cared for. But however, it is in somebody's personal private interest to make sure that chickens and cows or sheep are taken care of properly or used wisely. So even in that area, we find that private property plays a great role. If you look around, ask yourselves, if you're driving along the highway and look at those shiny trucks. If you see a very shiny truck, very well taken care of cared for truck, it's most likely that that truck is owner operated. And you see an old raggedy truck, it's one that where the driver is just an employer of the company. If you look at who takes care of a house, if you ask the question, who takes care of a house better, a renter or owner? Well, clearly, an owner has a vested stake in taking care of the property. A renter has a reduced set of incentives for taking care of the property. So private property plays a very, very important role in conserving on the scarce resources of our society.